Welcome to something special. Welcome to TEDx. This TEDx event is part of a global conversation that takes place every day in every corner of the world. In schools, in theaters, in workplaces, even in prisons, people gather to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. More than 3,000 TEDx events are held every year in 170 countries. It's a remarkable thing. TEDx events are self-organized under a license from TED, a non-profit organization devoted to discovering and sharing powerful ideas in the form of TED Talks. It's not TED itself, but your local TEDx team of volunteers that has done all the work to put on today's event, including booking all of the speakers. It's this team's ideas, dedication, and time that have made this possible. We really hope today's program sparks an exciting conversation. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you will take out. And now, on with the show.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 8th annual TedxRush U event, Hindsight 2020. TedxRush U provides a platform for the brightest minds to converge and inspire. We are committed to creating an event where participants are challenged to communicate their passions in an exciting and engaging dialogue. Speakers will present their forward-thinking ideas, and all participants will leave the conference inspired and empowered to create positive change. The event is in honor of Mayur Patel, an alumnus of Rush University's Health Systems Management program, who unexpectedly passed away in 2011. An individual who cherished the power of ideas and embraced the principles TEDx stands for. This year's theme is Hindsight 2020, a year of reflection, the lessons learned, and the path forged forward. The talks presented tonight will allow individuals to share their experiences in charting the various obstacles presented in 2020 and how they have grown from these challenges in life. We are extremely honored to have a diverse group of speakers with us tonight, and the event will consist of two parts, with a brief intermission in between. Before we introduce our first speaker, on behalf of all of us here at TedxRush U, we also want to thank you, the audience, for spending your Thursday night with us. We would not be able to have such a well-attended event if it wasn't for your support. Thank you. Without further ado, our first speaker for the evening will be Christopher C.J. Gross. The title of his speech, What's Your Zip Code Story? Understanding Class Bias. Christopher C.J. Gross is an international organizational development consultant, specializing in diversity and inclusion with 18 years of experience working with Fortune 500 companies, local and national nonprofits, and government agencies. CJ utilizes his background in engineering and his unique ability to deeply engage with his clients to uncover and resolve cultural as well as system issues that hinder employee performance and efficiency. He also serves as a business management adjunct faculty for the Community College of Baltimore County. Please join me in welcoming CJ Gross to the stage.
What if I told you I grew up in the zip code 90210, the Beverly Hills zip code? Would you think that I grew up in a nice house? Would you think that I went to an Ivy League college? Would you think that I was well traveled? Or would you think that my life was easy and I didn't have to work much for what I got? Well, whatever you thought, it was your brain's previously developed bias about that particular zip code. I call this your zip code story. Your zip code story is when your brain creates a narrative about others, and it's not just about your zip code. In Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blank, he tells us that in seconds, the brain creates a story about others, primarily for safety, which we call bias. Understanding class bias differently with 2020 vision can help you mitigate your zip code story. All right, so here's an example. In my business life, I'm a diversity and inclusion business consultant. And I flew quite often. Pre-COVID, remember those days when you could fly anywhere you wanted? Didn't have to wear a mask, didn't have to do a 14-day quarantine, didn't have to get your temperature checked. Well, one day I'm flying coach, which I often did, and I get to the airplane late, which I often did in those days. And I'm getting on the airplane and I'm walking past first class. And as I notice, everyone that I catch eye contact with is looking away. I'm thinking to myself, wow, these people are snobs. And then the line slows down, and then I notice that the flight attendant is holding up the line to serve one of those people snacks, warm hand towels, and all the drinks that they could drink. I'm thinking to myself, who needs warm hand towels for a 2.5-hour flight? Anyway, not my business. 1 week later, I'm flying the same carrier, and I get to the ticket gate, and I hear my name announced, Mr. Gross, could you come to the ticket counter? I get to the ticket counter and I'm excited because not only am I upgraded to first class, but I'm also getting on the airplane first for one of the first times. I sit down in my seat and the flight attendant rushes over to me and he says, can I get you anything to drink, snacks, warm hand towels? Yes, please, warm hand towels. I have to see what this is about. And I noticed that just like before, he's holding up the line. But this time I think to myself, wow, he has incredible customer service. I can't wait to write him a review. So he brings everything back and I think to myself, wow, this is awesome. But after 30 minutes of all the drinks I want and snacks, I'm ready to take off, but we can't take off because coach passengers were still getting on the airplane. And I recall I looked up and caught the eyes of a coach passenger that was getting on the airplane. And I immediately looked away. And I looked away because I didn't want him to see how frustrated I was. I just wanted him to hurry up and get on the plane. I had been sitting there drinking soda, eating almonds for 30 minutes. I was just ready to get in the air. It wasn't until the plane took off that I could really think about what happened in both of those situations and how those stories were different. I was also reminded of a book called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow by Daniel Kahneman that says we have two systems in the brain. System one is our fast brain, where our knee-jerk reactions live, our biases, our stories about people in first class and about people in coach. He also says that we have the slow brain, system two, where our brains process information and allow us to make decisions based on logical and reasonable information. In each situation, my brain, my fast brain, used a limited amount of data to create a narrative about each situation, one in coach and one in first class. Either way, I was responding to my fast brain. My brain had built an algorithm of information from my own background and past to create this narrative, which we do without being aware of it, without intention, and without control. The real challenge is not about not having biases, because we all have biases. The real challenge is moving from our fast brain to our slow brain, where we have the opportunity to mitigate our zip code story as well as our biases. Mitigating our zip code story is important because whether we grew up in first class in life or coach, we all have a zip code story. Our zip code story is not just about where we grew up, it's about how we grew up. It's about education or the lack of it. It's about exposure or the lack of it. It's about mentorship or the lack of it. It's about access to first class with warm hand towels or the lack of it. It's about the conversations you had around your dinner table. It's about the sights and sounds outside of your house. Let's take a page out of my father's zip code story. My father was raised by his great-grandparents who had a fourth grade education. He grew up in rural Charles County, Maryland, where he grew up in a house with no electricity and no running water. My great-grandparents, or his great-grandparents, never even showed up at his high school football games or his graduation. When I asked why not, he said it was the norm for his community for the parents not to show up because they didn't have access to transportation. And I said to myself, wow, whose parents wouldn't show up to their child's graduation? But that was my own bias because I had a different zip code story. So back to my father's zip code story. When he graduated from high school, he joined the military, where he had an opportunity to join the prestigious West Point Military Academy. Once in a lifetime opportunity. However, he declined this opportunity because he didn't have the guidance to make the decision. He didn't have the understanding and know-how. He didn't understand how this might change his trajectory in life. I often think to myself, how might my life be different had he made a different decision? But hindsight is 20/20. You see, my dad's zip code story is just one of many zip code stories where opportunities exist, but because of the lack of guidance and understanding of how important opportunities are not capitalized on. And so this becomes the challenge for the next generation who want to live beyond their own zip code story, who want to move and create a new story. We call these class migrants. Class migrants are affected by class bias more than any other group. According to a Harvard Business Review article entitled, "Why Companies Should Include Class in Their Diversity and Inclusion Discussion," a class migrant is a person who grows up in one social class and then moves to another social class at some point in their life. For example, if your parents were working class and didn't receive a college degree, you come along, receive your college degree, and then get a corporate job, you would be considered, based on this definition, a class migrant. Class migrants can feel burdened by living in two different worlds and not feel like they fit in. They can also find themselves in lack of guidance to capitalize on these opportunities. Class migrants can also feel rejected. They can feel a need to belong. Why is class migration important to understand? Because more than half of college graduates in the future are coming to a job near you. And if we don't know how to support class migrants, it's going to decrease our innovation and performance within our companies. Understanding class migration is important because it is the workforce of the future. Take Google, for example. They used to only hire from the top schools, but they realized that the top job candidates don't come from the top schools. They come from the community colleges, from the state colleges. Google realized by hiring more class migrants, they can increase their innovation, their performance, overall diversity and inclusion, and ultimately increase employee retention. Here are some tips for individual class migrants that have helped me along the way. Find people who can mentor you, who can help you dream beyond your own zip code story. Mentors don't have to be people you know. It can be books. It can be through TED Talks. You can go to YouTube. Find people who are not like you, that have different backgrounds, and engage and build relationships with them. I love the quote by Charlie Tremendous Jones, who says, "You are the same today as you will be in 5 years from now, except for two things: the people you meet and the books you read." I just shared some tips for individual class migrants. But what can we do as business leaders and HR professionals to support class migrants in the workforce? We can hire marginalized job candidates, provide them with internships, mentorship, and most of all, stretch opportunities that allow them to showcase their talent. When we hire the right job candidates, this being marginalized groups or class migrants, we're statistically more likely to increase our innovation, our performance, and overall diversity and inclusion, meanwhile mitigating our own zip code story. In closing, when we see class bias clear with 2020 vision, we start the process of mitigating our own zip code story. You see, our zip code story is not just about our story. It's about the stories that have been passed down through the lived experiences of others, and it shapes the way we see our potential and the potential of others. If we sit in a position of power in business, it influences who we choose to hire and support within our companies. So I ask you, what's your zip code story?
What a great start to the show. Now, without any further delay, let me introduce our next speaker, Tuka Zakai. Tuka Zakai's speech is titled Elephant in the Dark, Preparing for the Next Pandemic with Population Health. What is population health? While there are multiple definitions, it often includes elements of eliminating disease and health disparities by intersecting the overlapping factors that influence health. Tuka Zakai is a certified public health professional and the manager for fluoridation and preventative health activities at the American Dental Association. Her work includes educating and collaborating with community leaders on public health topics, including community water fluoridation, tobacco cessation, school-based oral health, interprofessional collaboration, and nutrition. Her work integrates the importance of oral health when addressing total health questions. Advocacy extends to the larger idea of health in all policies in order to empower intersectional leaders to make decisions with the lens of population health. Ms. Zakai is a liaison to the CDC's Community Preventative Services Task Force, has completed a master's in public health at the University of California, Davis School of Medicine, and is a current master's in population health management candidate at Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. Please join me in welcoming Tuka Zakai to the stage.
In the 13th century, the Persian poet Rumi shared the fable of the elephant in the dark. In this story, a number of men go into a dark room with an elephant inside. Now, these men have never seen an elephant and begin to touch and feel the animal, and depending on where they touch it, they begin to describe what they think they are sensing. One says that the animal is like a water spout after touching the trunk. Another, like a large fan after touching the ear. Another, a strong pillar after feeling the leg. And finally, like a throne after touching its back. Rumi uses this story to share that individual and fragmented perception will often lead to a misguided conclusion. Rumi ends his poem by stating, if each had a candle and they went in together, the differences would disappear. I also wonder what would happen if it weren't all men going into the room, but that's another story entirely. Now, what happens when we compare this fable to an experience of the American healthcare system, which often feels like navigating through a dark room? Let's say I need heart surgery, a coronary artery bypass grafting. Now, first, I need to connect with my own dental provider to make sure I have dental clearance. Then check with my insurance provider, if I even have one, and see if I have the proper funds to pay for my care. I arrange my own transportation to and from the hospital. I connect with my primary care doctor and surgeon who may or may not even talk to each other. So already we have seen that to manage my health for one surgery, I have coordinated with 5 different sectors. Similar to Rumi's fable, our American healthcare system has been built to be fragmented, with each individual acting in their silo, and collaboration with other groups and organizations is labeled as an initiative rather than the design. This fragmentation is not only confusing, but perpetuates the philosophy of individualism, where emphasis is on the individual rather than the group. Now, while Rumi's friends are touching the elephant, did anyone ask, why is this room dark? Why is there an animal in here? And while we are experiencing the healthcare system, who asked, what happened to put my heart at risk anyway? Why aren't these teams coordinating my care or working with case managers? And those are the kinds of questions that happen in public health, the ones that ask about the conditions that led to the situation in the first place. Public health is one of the most reported topics in the media, and that was before our current pandemic. It is a term that has transformed meaning in our recent history. When we hear of what type of bread will make you live to 100, to why a zip code can predict how healthy your lungs are, or how long to wash your hands after returning from finding the last toilet paper roll at the grocery store. That's all public health. And since 2020, COVID-19 became a household virus name. It changed how we worked, stocked up on hand sanitizer, and introduced the latest fashion statement, the mask. We had to be innovative, but we also had a newfound responsibility, not just for our own health, but the health of the population. No more individualism. It wasn't going to work for us. And COVID-19 showed us that our current health system is broken. We do work in fragmented silos rather than a connected system. While every nation was impacted by COVID-19, the United States was especially ripe for a devastating virus to affect our most vulnerable populations. And our most vulnerable populations are made so because of our historically racist and classist structures. These systems were designed to make us like the men in the room with the elephant. Separated, hard to see, difficult to understand. It was time for all of us to think about how everything we do will always influence the same topic, health. Now, for a population health management specialist like myself, this was a conversation we were waiting for, but never wished for. We knew another pandemic was only a matter of time away, and I know you may not want to hear this, but the next pandemic is also around the corner. I know what you're thinking. Can bread really make you live to 100? Jury's out on that one, but I can answer the second thing you might be thinking. I keep hearing the terms public health and population health. Is there a difference? Is public health going to stop the next pandemic? Yes and no. Think of population health as the legs of the elephant. Yes, that story is going to come back. Public health is just one of the 4 parts that lead to stable community design. For the health of a population to be addressed, public health comes together with health policy, quality and safety, and chronic disease management. So not only are you ready for your Population Health 101 class, but you can see how public health infrastructure is not the only answer to addressing health problems and avoiding pandemics. But these 4 different systems need to be balanced for a population to have a foundation rooted in health and be prepared for the next virus. While we are still figuring out each next step in managing this disease, there are 2 things we can all do now to not only address our current public health crisis, but also sustainably prepare for what's still yet to come. The first, The need for every individual, yes, you, to take on the responsibility to think with a lens of health. Now, this is going to address one of the legs, that of health policy. Because what do an educator, lawyer, and artist all have in common, other than student debt? The opportunity to make decisions rooted in bettering the health of the populations they serve in their work. We have a concept called health in all policies, where every law should somehow address health. This also implies health in all professions. Professions influence policies, and health policies influence if a system is designed to put disease prevention first and support those that are most vulnerable or not. As a country built with policies that were not designed for the health of all people due to discrimination by gender and race, we have a lot of work to do to address health in all policies by breaking down systemic inequities. This is accessible and affordable housing, healthcare, and food security. This is safe fluoridated drinking water. This is being able to get a COVID test or vaccine with reliable transportation. This is accessing quality education. The professions that move toward health in all policies are engineers, school board officials, city planners, hospital executives, everyone. Young members of our communities also play a vital role in uplifting the health of our populations and are already leading conversations that address the health of our planet and people. Having a paying job is not what gives people value or a role in the conversation of population health. Any person, regardless of age or job status, has stakeholdership in population health. For the last few years, the youth led a climate strike in the streets across our world, advocating for policies that would fundamentally address climate. Climate control is directly related to novel viruses. And not only did 2020 see a pandemic, but increased wildfire activity, locusts, and record high temperatures. And in February 2021, we saw southern states frozen over. People in power need to listen to the young voices and act. Now, the second thing we can all do is address the dire need for interprofessional collaboration and communication in our systems, which addresses the three legs of public health, quality and safety, and chronic disease management. This is when we move from individualism to collectivism. One of the biggest lessons of the novel coronavirus pandemic was the need for all systems, especially health systems, to have networks of care among community programs, public health departments, and health delivery areas. The two legs of quality and safety and chronic disease management are strongest when there is alignment between interprofessional departments and sectors. Now, my professional role is rooted in addressing oral disease prevention on a national scale. Oral health professionals have long worked in silos with fragmented medical and dental education systems, delivery systems, and coverage systems. Our entire system was designed to basically say, let's take the mouth out of the body. If the dental and medical systems were designed to not even speak to each other, what is happening with every other facet of health? Well, as we saw with COVID, it's not doing so great. But things have already changed. Oral health professionals are working and are starting to be able to give the COVID-19 vaccine. Medical and dental professionals are coordinating care with integrated health record systems. There are now more teledentistry options than before that can help coordinate care. We saw a fragmented system is not going to effectively prevent disease. We're ready to answer the question. What are we going to do about it? We're going to move forward now that our hindsight is 2020. Every health innovation and decision will be rooted in what happened in 2020 with the viral pandemic, racially inequitable systems being highlighted in our societies, and the acceleration of climate change. And it's happening in real time. And we're fundamentally going to redesign how we collaborate and build our systems. The lesson of this year will guide us into a healthier and more interconnected future. Bread may not make you live to 100, but our communities can be rebuilt with a population health lens so we all can. So let's turn on the lights and address the elephant in the room.
Thank you for sharing with us, Tuka. Now let me introduce our next speaker, Sarita Love. The title of Sarita Love's speech is The Success of Trauma: How Challenges Make Champions. Sarita Love is a Chicago native, mom, author, and personal brand strategist who educates by combining book and street smarts. As the founder of Success Junkie, she provides tools and resources that inspire excellence. She is a relational, group, and organizational professional who has a background that includes community outreach, special events, personal brand strategy, and integrated marketing communications. While working specifically with the youth and socially enterprising professionals to attain their personal and professional goals, Sarita pushes most people beyond their own personal barriers so they can get out into the world and become the person they deserve to be. By implementing personal branding, marketing, and success strategies, she ensures achievement to anyone committed to win in life. Please give a warm welcome as she joins us on this year's TedxRush U stage.
Something we all can relate to is being born. It must have been a traumatic experience because most of us came into the world crying, when laughter is an emotion too, right? When was the last time you seen a baby laughing fresh out of the womb? I think it would be quite humorous to witness, and I would love to see it. Maybe you were bullied, survived a disaster, were sexually, verbally, or emotionally abused. All of these incidents are traumatizing, and not addressing trauma can do several things. It can create difficulty to succeed in school. It can hinder work productivity. It can be damaging to relationships with oneself and others. It also increases violence while shortening lifespans. I've experienced trauma firsthand, and I somehow remain optimistic about the future. Born and raised mostly in Inglewood, on the south side of Chicago, a community notoriously known for its crime, drugs, alcohol, and sexual abuse. I had a courtside view of drive-by shootings, gang violence, poverty, and more. Trauma could have made my life lens a little blurry, but it paved a way for limitless possibilities. I believe trauma can make you successful. Yes, you. We hear about the devastating effects of trauma, PTSD, and its negative impact. I'm here to reveal the success of trauma by presenting a new form of PTSD, a post-traumatic success do-over, where you can clear your mental runways and prepare for takeoff with clearer skies in your life. Speaking of skies, I was born on the 4th of July, a day where fireworks decorates our skylines across the nation. It can also be a day where many are traumatized by the sounds reminiscent of gunshots and bombs on battlegrounds. Every birthday, my father told me that the fireworks were all for me, and I believed him until the 2nd grade. Imagine being in class learning about those fireworks were actually a celebration of Independence Day and not you. Well, let me tell you, I did not like the lie that my teacher was telling my classmates on July 4th, 1776. So what did I do? I walked up to her desk and told her that she was wrong and that the 4th of July was my special day because my daddy told me so. And she told me, Miss Love, have a seat and discuss this matter with your father when you get home. I was traumatized. Well, not really, but my daddy seemed to be pretty agitated that she didn't just stick to a script that she hadn't been provided with. What a memory. If I listed every category of trauma that I could think of, and I asked you to raise your hand, if one of them were applicable to a moment in your life, I believe that most hands would be raised, because studies reveal that 3 out of 4 people will experience some form of trauma before adulthood. Now, I was taught to get on the ground when I heard shots fired as a little girl. I was in the middle of a shootout for the first time, playing at the playground. The second time, on my way to the neighborhood grocery store, and the third of many, Father's Day weekend when I was returning home. You see, I know exactly what it's like to see someone pull a trigger with the intent to kill. This shouldn't be normal. And these are not memories that I'm fond of, nor memories I can erase. In summer of 1993, my brothers, Ricky, Irvin, and I, lost our mother at the ages 13, 9, and 4. That altered our lives tremendously because she was only 29 when she passed away. And if you're wondering, she passed of kidney failure and cardiac arrest. After she passed on, I was raised in several households, fortunately with family. Love y'all. I attended many elementary schools, 7 to be exact, transferring between 4 different schools in 8th grade on 4 different sides of town in Chicago. I ended up attending 2 additional high schools as well. I want you to understand that I witnessed and was exposed to far too much within the first decade of my life. My second wasn't much easier. Every few months, I would read headlines in the local news highlighting someone I loved dearly or knew personally, and it wasn't for good accolades, but because they were murdered. Many memorable success stories have some form of trauma attached to them. Think about your favorite celebrity who's defied the odds, or a Paralympian athlete like a blind swimmer, or a socially enterprising entrepreneur who champions for a cause that he or she is committed to. In many instances, it was their trauma that fueled their success. Mine surely fueled mine. My teen years were years where I was exposed to true leadership because I was never a follower. I did my own thing. In high school, I became president or vice president over many extracurricular activities, including junior and senior class. I even presided over every student council in the city of Chicago through the Chicago District Student Council Association. So those of you who thought I wasn't in class enough in high school, well, now you know why. My traumatic life skills taught me to successfully navigate new life experiences. My high school principal and school counselor were 2 of the first people to invest in my personal development. And ironically enough, I graduated high school most likely to succeed. These experiences led me to creating my achievement lifestyle brand called Success Junkie, where I help people turn their traumas into success stories that inspires them and others to persevere. My college years were something special, let me tell you. There I was at the largest Catholic Vincentian Catholic University in the country, excited to build my future. And one night, I had to run out of class to the restroom, but I didn't make it there because I vomited all over the hallway floor and later on found out I was pregnant. The rest of college was spent with a baby boy on the way and a new kid on campus. This was not my idea of success. I literally raised my son Ananias at DePaul University, nursed him in my lecture halls in the back of class, took him to my campus jobs in the dormitories where my boss allowed me to do so. I was getting my degree no matter what, and sure, I was embarrassed being one of the women who looked like me on campus, appearing to be the statistic society could have set me up to become. I used to tell my son he's been to college already because we got my degree together. And today he holds a 4.6 GPA in high school. The next 10 years after college were very trying, to say the least. I was trying to find myself still. How many of you do that from time to time? I think we're always trying to find something, just like I'm always trying to find my keys, even though I purchased a hook to hang them on that I never use. That decade after college was full of highs, lows, eviction notices, heartbreak, and more. Allow me to fast forward to Super Bowl Sunday 2017. I had just completed speaking at a big event and celebrating at an after party while watching Tom Brady lead an epic comeback in overtime against the Falcons. I missed a few calls thinking maybe that was my dad calling me about the game because I saw his name. And I answered the next call that came in and I was advised to rush to the hospital. I wasn't even aware that my dad had been admitted a few days prior. I was furious, confused, and hurt because that was the last day he would be able to speak and I wouldn't make it to hear his voice. When I arrived, he was on life support and I was devastated. We had countless tests ran and an emergency biopsy performed, only to reveal that he was in his 4th stage of cancer with several other ailments that made his condition worse. 3 days later, on February 8th, 2017, it was on me to decide that my father would never breathe again. That was one of the most of many traumatic days of my entire life. Now, remember what my dad told me about the 4th of July? Well, about a month prior, he was in the hospital and he told me a story about when he was 10 years old. And at this point, I've been his daughter for 32 years and he's never shared this story with me about him going to the carnival or amusement park on the 3rd or 4th of July. I don't remember the exact date. But what I do know is he found money on a ride and he was so happy to get home to share his excitement with his mother. My grandmother, I wouldn't get a chance to meet. However, she wasn't home because she was at the hospital and she passed away on July 5th, 1974. Now I understand why he loved collecting coins so much. I learned the reason that he told me I was so special on July 4th because he himself was traumatized every Independence Day until I was born 10 years later. He called me his new beginning, and that's what we're here to discuss today, new beginnings. Because trauma is the response to a deeply distressing or disturbing event that overwhelms an individual's ability to cope, causing feelings of helplessness while diminishing sense of self. Post means past tense or after the fact. Traumatic is anything that's emotionally disturbing, and success is the accomplishment of aim or purpose. And a do-over is the opportunity to create something new. A post-traumatic success do-over requires you to face that trauma head on. Because when trauma is properly addressed, it can create less difficulty to succeed in school. It can boost productivity in the workplace and in business. It can foster healthier relationships while decreasing violence and lengthening lifespans. Today is your day to remove your mental glass ceiling and begin where everyone sees their challenges as the end, so you can become a champion. I like to diagnose you today with PTSD, where you can grant yourself permission to succeed without self-sabotage. In hindsight of 2020, I have a vision for you for years to come, where you can re-engineer your mindset and press the reset button only to realize that the sky is not the limit, but where you start. The next time that you think of PTSD, I need you to think differently. PTSD, not post-traumatic stress disorder, but maybe you just need a post-traumatic success do-over. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your story with us, Sarita. We really enjoyed listening to your personal and professional endeavors. Now, let me introduce our next speaker, Dr. Toya Webb. The title of Dr. Webb's speech is Dismantling Microaggressions Through the Power of Connection. Born and raised on the south side of Chicago, Dr. Toya Webb is a systems disruptor, status quo killer, and social justice advocate. In her recently published study on racial microaggressions, Dr. Webb explores the impact of commonly held stereotypes while amplifying the voices of African American women in leadership. A fervent speaker and certified professional life coach, Dr. Webb is the recipient of numerous awards, including a WYCA Leadership Award in Communications and Technology. She has been named one of the best under 40 by the Kane County Chronicle and is recognized as a mover and shaker by the American Association for Women in Community Colleges. With a combined passion for higher education and storytelling, Dr. Webb, a former news reporter, serves as the Chief Marketing and Communications Officer at an Illinois community college and is a member of the Diversity and Equity Committee with the Public Relations Society of America. Dr. Webb has a zeal for reaching the most vulnerable populations, enjoys being a mentor, and is dedicated to helping others find their purpose. She is married to her high school sweetheart and is a proud mom to 3 sons.
As an African American woman, I am keenly aware of how the duality of race and gender impacts every aspect of my life. It's simply something that follows me everywhere that I go, literally. Like the time I was out shopping at a department store. And this was one of those department stores that prides itself on one-to-one customer service. So I'm out shopping, and a woman comes over and stands right in front of me and tries to hand me her clothing items. I knew what was happening in that moment, but instead of reacting, I decided to pause. And she was just standing there looking at me. As I was standing there looking at her, it was really, really awkward. And then I responded and said, "Are you looking to me to store your clothing items in a dressing room for you?" She looked me dead in the eye, nodded her head, and said yes. One of the managers witnessed the encounter from the other side of the room and decided to come over to see what was happening. And before I walked away, I turned to the woman and said, "Just so that you know, I'm a customer, just like you." How do we explain what happened in that moment? I mean, where was the confusion? I was wearing a winter coat and a beanie. Had I actually worked there, it was clear that I was not on the clock. And as I reflect on that moment, even years later, it's such a stark reminder that some people will judge me first based on what they see. And this is an example of a microaggression. Microaggressions are everyday insults, usually directed towards marginalized groups, sometimes by well-intentioned people. And this ranges from intentionally mispronouncing ethnic names to trying to be inclusive by using language that conveys colorblindness. Other times, microaggressions clearly expose ingrained prejudices. Think of all of the isms: racism, sexism, ageism, classism. These are all embedded in our systems, our structures, and our norms. And if you break those down into everyday brief interactions, you get microaggressions. And one of the most common ways that we affirm systems of oppression, sometimes without even knowing it, is through microaggressions. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. Microaggressions is a term first coined in the 1970s by Harvard psychologist Dr. Chester Pierce. And one of the most prominent researchers on the topic today is Dr. TedxRush U. And together, researchers have identified 3 forms of microaggressions: microassaults, which are conscious and deliberate actions. Think of it as old-fashioned racism. Micro-insults are behaviors that demean a person's racial heritage or identity. And micro-invalidations simply invalidate the feelings and experiences of people of color. I was so fascinated with this topic that I spent a year researching Black women's experiences with microaggressions. And some of them could recall extreme forms, which included name-calling and being singled out in the classroom by their peers and even their teachers, as early as kindergarten. And this type of behavior was also prevalent in their workplaces, where they were commended for sounding articulate or criticized and questioned extensively about their hair. While microaggressions are sometimes dismissed as harmless, psychologists refer to the impact over time as death by 1,000 cuts. And research has shown that if not addressed, microaggressions can lead to depression, low self-esteem, alienation, and other serious complications. And when it comes to the workplace, microaggressions can lead to employee disengagement, which is already costing corporations up to $550 billion a year in loss of workplace productivity. What would it look like if we came together across lines of race to do things that we simply cannot do alone? Think about it. And if you want to move the needle in that direction, we first need to acknowledge that systems of oppression exist. A recent study on race in America by the Pew Research Center reported that nearly 2/3 of Blacks, or approximately 65%, recalled times where people were simply suspicious of them. And we've all seen this play out in everyday life, when police are called on innocent Black men for enjoying everyday activities like barbecuing or simply bird watching. And this type of microaggression is referred to as the assumption of criminal status, which automatically presumes that a person of color is dangerous or a threat to society solely on the basis of their race. I sometimes think about how we all have the privilege of living in one of the most diverse countries on the planet, and we are soon to be a society of no racial majority. Yet, this same country has to own that racism has shaped how wealth is accumulated, how justice is rendered, and how marginalized groups are disproportionately impacted across the board by various forms of oppression. And we have to be willing to approach these difficult topics with empathy and intellectual humility. And if we do it right, then all sides will be transformed. Looking back on my own attempts to build connection through conversation, specifically conversations about race, I learned the hard way that we don't know how to have conversations about race. Instead of seeking to understand, we seek to discredit. Instead of listening, we choose what parts of the conversation to focus on, and then we internalize that information in a way that leads to self-guilt and finger-pointing. Take social media, for example. These virtual platforms were created to foster a sense of community, yet they have evolved into a pulpit of dissent, where hate speech and bigotry have bubbled over into every corner of America. What if the power of connection was the key to healing our nation's divide? At its core, connection is a psychological need that allows us to feel a sense of togetherness through shared experiences. And if we want to get started with building connection, it first starts with diversifying our circles. First, I want you to take inventory of the people that you are connected to. Does everyone look like you and think like you and vote like you? When my husband was in the Army, he reported to formation at 5:50 a.m. for roll call to see who was present and accounted for. Let's pretend that it's 5:50 a.m. Take a look down your row. Who is standing next to you? Who's in your squad? And then I want you to take a look around the room and tell me who is noticeably absent. From there, I want to offer you 3 ways that you can begin to build a more diverse community. 1, look for opportunities to support and advocate for marginalized groups, which not only includes people of color, but people with disabilities and our veterans. There are lots of organizations that could use a few extra volunteers. 2, you gotta speak up. Use your voice, your power, and your privilege to help advance the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion in your communities of influence. This is work that we simply cannot do alone. And 3, learn more about the systems of oppression. And this can be done from the comfort of your own home by watching documentaries or reading books about race and privilege in America. Don't be afraid to challenge your own beliefs. And for some of you, I realize that this short list might seem intimidating. So do what makes sense for you, even if that includes inviting a neighbor of a different background over for dinner. And as we build these small, meaningful connections and be more intentional about our everyday interactions, little by little, we can begin a journey to eliminating microaggressions and ultimately destroying systems of oppression. And let's be clear, the need for authentic connections does not remove the need for accountability. Instead, it invites us in and calls on us to be more courageous as we hold ourselves and each other to a higher standard. And it also allows us to not only envision a better America, but to actually participate in creating it. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the first part of our program has concluded, and we will now start our 15-minute intermission. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Now please join me in welcoming the first speaker for the second part of our program, Kristen Evans. Kristen's speech is titled, Closing the Wellness Gap: What 80 Years of Black Women Taught Me About Generational Wellness. Kristen Evans is an award-winning insights researcher and strategist, championing the voice of the consumer in product innovation companies, social institution businesses and marketing, advertising, and media. A Chicago native, University of Michigan and Gonzaga University graduate, Kristen emphasizes the art and science of connecting the dots, using social sciences and storytelling to understand and build relationships between people, cultures, experiences, and entities. Is currently the Executive Director of Accounts as well as the Director of Research and Insights at an independent advertising agency. She is a national guest lecturer in marketing and communications, an instructor in business and entrepreneurship education, and a pro bono consultant to arts and culture nonprofits. As a well-being ambassador, Evans combined her kinesiology degree, Pilates certification, and dance background with her consumer research, business and marketing experience to create the Strength and Grace Group, an insights-driven wellness company think tank that explores the intersection of history and culture, physiology and behavior, and stress and burnout, especially among Black people. Evans is on the board of directors for Forward Momentum Chicago Dance, a 2021 Impact Leadership Development Program Fellow, and a Management Leadership of Tomorrow alumni. Her awards include the David Ogilvy Award from the American Research Foundation, Outstanding Consultant of the Year from the Arts and Business Council of Chicago, Product Innovation of the Year from Procter & Gamble, and Multicultural Shopper Marketing of the Year from the Target Corporation. Ladies and gentlemen, Kristen Evans.
My grandma worked at night. Third shift supervisor of a meal planning company for a global airline catering company. When the company was acquired, she was extended an early retirement package for time served, 30 plus years. She accepted it. As part of the package, they had to buy out her unused vacation time. She had more than several weeks. For over 20 plus years, my mom has worked overnight. Second shift, production supervisor at a national candy manufacturing plant. When the company was changing over to a new payroll system, the HR manager called my mom and said, hey, you have a lot of unused vacation time. You might want to start using that. Remember that time doesn't roll over. She had a lot of unused weeks. Me, I'm a 9-to-5er, which is never really 9 to 5, by the way. But when I exited my first Fortune 500 company, I needed to cash out my unused paid time off. As you could probably imagine by now, I had several weeks unused. See a pattern unfolding here? 3 generations of women, 3 different ages, stages, industries, and experiences in our career, and yet we have a lot of similarities. Number 1, our circadian clocks are all off. I mean, we clearly do not equate nighttime with sleep time. And number 2, we seem to have missed the memo that paid time off is indeed time that you're supposed to take off. A few years ago, I started noticing these behaviors very similar to my mom and my grandma, and it got me to worrying. Actually, I probably should have taken a day off and went to sleep, but instead I went to work. See, I'm a consumer behavior researcher by trade, and I am completely fascinated by attitudes and habits and practices that begin to reveal themselves in patterns and trends to help you understand people. And so I did what any good researcher would do in this case. I designed an observational and interview research study, which is really just a fancy way of saying that I curiously watched 5 generations of women in my family and asked them a whole bunch of questions. In doing so, I learned a few things. Number 1, Black women lack personal wellness and the this need to survive is the leading cause for it. Black women are historically underemployed and underpaid, laboring in blue, pink, and even gray-collar jobs, many that start as hourly jobs, dollars earned for hours worked, which means the last thing that any Black woman is trying to do is take a day off. I remember when I was a kid, if you wanted to get my sister and I to turn our act right on real quick in school, threatened to call my mom in the middle of the workday. We were like, we're good. We got it together, because the last thing we wanted mommy to do was leave her job, because we knew if she needed to leave her job to come and deal with us, that meant that her check would be short that week and everybody in the house was going to have a problem. And the thing is that not only is it a financial situation, but before we can even start talking about paid time off, you need to have some. See, America, shamefully, by the way, has the distinct honor of being the only developed nation that does not have guaranteed paid time off. A lot of hourly workers, shift workers, labor workers don't have time off if they need it. So they're embarrassed if they have to go to their supervisor and ask for the time off. One of the ways to earn time off is time served, yes, but it's also about the position that you're in. So Black women start teaching and training themselves for positions that might be labeled above them, or even worse yet, a man's job. So they're showing to work a little early, staying a little late, all trying to teach themselves because no one else will teach us how to do it, trying to get that better job. And it starts to make you tired. You start sleeping less, sleeping worse. Your body starts to get tight and it starts to get tense. And you're doing this day in and day out. But every day you get up, you put on your best dress possible for the day's job, because see, presentation is preservation. And grandma used to say that just because they're wearing you out don't mean you got to look worn down. So you put your best self on. You got finances at the top of your mind. You're laboring and you're tired trying to get this next job. And then you're emotionally and mentally drained. Why? Because mentally you're second guessing yourself. You're wondering, should I go for it? Do I have what it takes? And emotionally, you're swallowing all of the rude behaviors and insulting, snide comments and the looks that they give you that say everything, even when they're saying nothing. And so when you think about all this, my body's tired, my mind is running, my emotions are shut down. Where and how does wellness fit into all of that when all I'm trying to do is survive? It doesn't. You just tag. And yes, I said tag. And it's not because I don't know that there's an R in the word tired, and it's not because I'm incapable of pronouncing the word tired. But see, that kind of tired, that kind of soul weariness, that goes way beyond being tired. That goes to being tagged. Now, you might be more familiar with the term burnout. And that brings me to my second key learning. Not only do Black women lack personal wellness opportunities, but there is also a wellness gap. Black women are left out of the modern wellness movement because it does not capture our reality. I asked my 85-year-old granny, she's part of the silent generation, I said, Granny, have you ever experienced burnout? The first thing she did was look at me. She said, baby, what's that? And so when I got done explaining it to her, she said, oh, that's some stuff you young people done made up. We always been tired. That's just the way it is. And so when you say things like mental fatigue, when you say things like burnout, when you say things like lean in, see, that doesn't resonate with us, because for Black women, there's no leaning in, right? We're busy trying to manage our resting faces that you say don't look engaged, or our presence that you say is intimidating, or our tone that you say makes us feel like we are speaking in a way that is a little harsh, a little angry, and you know where I'm going with that. Of course, angry Black woman, right? But we're none of those. The point of the matter is that those words, burnout, mental fatigue, they sound really good. They just don't represent our reality. So while self-care Saturdays and lean in at work and radical love movements are all really well intended, they're leaving Black women standing on the fringes, leaving wellness yet again inaccessible to us, unacceptable from us, and widening the wellness gap. So this combined lack of personal wellness, coupled with this growing wellness gap, it's resulted in something very daunting: generational wellness debt. Yes, wellness debt. See, my behaviors were passed down to me. This idea that I don't take time off, that I go to work even when I'm sick, that I'm always doing something, that was what my mom did. And so I learned it by watching her. And she didn't do it on purpose. It was no ill intention. She taught me something tremendous. That goes a very long way today, by the way. She taught me work ethic. But inside of that, she never taught me work-life balance. And that's not her fault. Let's be really clear. She was simply doing what she saw her mom do. And my grandmother was raising 6 kids and showing up to work every day, sometimes a little late, but showing up every single day because that just is what needed to get done. And so she was showing extreme strength, but very little rest. But once again, that wasn't her fault because, see, that was handed down to her. So generation after generation, we are all working from depletion and deficit, and now here we are in debt. So fact is, I'm in 4th generation wellness debt. Ironically, I was at a wellness event with those same 3 generations that I told you about, my grandmother, my mom, and myself, and I discovered something. One Sunday morning, we turned off our phones, we sat around with one another, we laughed and joked, we ate skinny popcorn, we asked each other how we were doing, and we really, truly wanted to know. We stretched while we were sitting in the middle of the floor. We even took a good old dance break to New Editions, If It Isn't Love, because it's New Edition, and you should just do the dance, by the way, and it'll make you happy. And a couple hours later, we all went home, checked in on one another, and said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "I'm resting." We all went to bed that night, at night, normal hours, when you're supposed to go to sleep, and we slept well. And that's when I had the aha moment. Number 1, invest in rest. Black women are famous for saying we're doing nothing and we're always doing something. What you doing? Nothing. Cooking, cleaning, doing a whole bunch of stuff. We don't need to do nothing. We need to rest. And let me be very clear. Rest is an action word. It's recovering, recuperating, rejuvenating, restoring. Rest is the very foundation of wellness. Even if you take all the Peloton rides, drink the 64 ounces of water, eat all the fruits and vegetables, if you don't have rest, you don't have wellness. Second thing is we need to close the gap, the wellness gap, with cultural understanding, cultural relevancy, and cross-cultural communication. See, words matter. We identify with words. We relate with words. And if the words of every Woman in the Workplace initiative or DEI program or Wellness at Work program uses words that fail to land and reflect my true reality, well, then you continue to leave me out of the wellness movement. And lastly, when we do invest in rest, when we do close the wellness gap, we have this amazing opportunity to build wellness wealth. See, wealth is accumulated. And if I start some wellness habit and I tell my mom about it, it may take her a little while because that's not her reality. But maybe one day she'll take the day off just because. And when she figures out what that feels like, she'll tell her mom, "Hey, Mom, go to California and see your sisters. I know you don't take vacation days, don't know what that's like in 40 years, but just go do it." And see, the more that each person keeps doing it and sharing it with someone else, we're all accumulating some assets. And then we're all contributing to the Black generational wellness. So while I might be in 4th generational wellness debt, I am a 1st generational wellness investigator. And my great mission is to restore the generations in wellness. Restore the generations before me, restore the generations with me, and restore the generations to come after me. It's time to restore generational wellness.
What a truly inspiring speech, Kristen. Thank you again for coming and joining us. Now please join me in welcoming Edward G. Young. Edward G. Young's speech is titled Turning Privilege into Purpose. Edward G. Young III is a poet, author, and internationally acclaimed public speaker, originally hailing from the gritty, blue-collar town of Gary, Indiana. From an early age, Edward has understood the power of words and allowed himself to harness their strength via both the page and the stage. Having survived a near-fatal broken neck injury, Edward also practices mindfulness and inner strength techniques, which have helped him to develop the mindset necessary to break through and overcome any difficult situation he has faced. As a further means of therapy, Edward turned toward sharing his story with the world and connecting with individuals from all walks of life. He is fueled by his desire to inspire while also encouraging others to openly embrace and overcome the many challenges life brings.
Growing up, I lived in a bubble. Not one of those bubbles. And not a bubble like the playoffs of the NBA season of 2020. My bubble came in the form of being raised in a loving, hardworking, dual-parent household in one of the most densely populated African-American cities in America, Gary, Indiana. Growing up, I idolized athletes like Bo Nose Jackson and watched sitcoms where characters like Steve, Did I Do That? Urkel made it cool to be a nerd. The word minority was never even on my radar because not only was I surrounded in a community where individuals resembled me, but my parents ensured that the images of Black America that I was exposed to were overwhelmingly positive. To really bring that fact to life, and it's a true story. As a kid, I quit piano lessons because they coincided with the start time of two of my favorite TV shows, The Cosby Show and A Different World. And as a family, we had just graduated from 11-inch black and white TV to color TV. So this was long before the modern day era of record live TV and watch it later. The irony of those experiences of growing up around so much Black excellence at such an early age is that I foolishly, with all my heart, believed that Black people were the majority, not just in my hometown, but all across the nation. Until one day, that tiny little bubble I had been living in was popped wide open. Nobody knows the trouble I've been through. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. 6th grade, first year in public school, nervous, yet I played it cool. Still surrounded by peers that looked like me, but a vibe much different than my previous 5 years in private school. Fighting on the playground was a regular thing. When the recess bell rung, fists swung, and I had my fair share of battles. Some lost, some won. Nobody knows the trouble I've been through. By the end of that school year, my demeanor had my parents disturbed. A real-life Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. 3 years, 3 different schools, only this time shipped off to the suburbs. from shared connections to classmates, to being exposed for the first time to hate. Minding my business head down, not knowing how to relate, not knowing there would one day be a trigger. Get out my way, you stupid nigger. Enraged by those words, I pounced and pounded with all of my might, but the event overshadowed by the chorus of students surrounding, chanting, "Fight, fight, a black and a white, fight, fight, a black and a white." Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Some events, no matter how far back they stretch, remain etched in our brains. Soul-piercing scars worn like unseen tattoos of pain. I pulled back further after that verbal attack. Not much longer thereafter, the health of my mother went awry. I took an extended leave from school, not knowing if I would ever return back as she battled to survive. Her courage and determination to cheat death during her fight taught me that there are no cheat codes in life. Instead of isolating myself and remaining a victim, I used communication in place of fist as a means towards fixing a broken system. Upon my return to school, I opened a dialogue. "Hey man, what you called me in the hallway? It wasn't cool. I know, and I'm sorry. It was stupid. It was dumb. Want to hang out with me and the guys after school so maybe we can get to know each other some?" Nobody knows the trouble I've been through. Nobody knows. Actually, everybody knows. But what we do with that knowledge can make a difference in how we impact the world. I've heard that acceptance is the first step towards recovery, a step towards change, a transmutation of pain where ways of acting and thinking no longer remain the same. Funny, but the word privilege was not met with controversy until you put a black or white in front of it. Resistance from a feigned acceptance of those unwilling to confront its existence. Objections like, "I worked hard for what I have. My family never owned slaves," or "I made it out of less than ideal conditions. Why can't you?" Arguing against it. Prison numbers climbing, redlining, profiling, viewed as mere coincidence. I grew up in a city where many of my peers' biggest dream was to not be in jail or the ground before the age of 18. A city where the staccato of gunfire at night filled the air like ghetto symphonies. "Give us free!" Screamed by the masses long after Amistad, but I survived the Middle Passage. My survival, my freedom, does not give me a free pass to turn my back on a younger generation experiencing the same cyclic regeneration. My privilege comes in the form of service, guidance, conversations like this. Not a right, but privilege. Privilege. A word synonymous with freedom, so why be offended by its usage? Instead, use it to make an impact much larger than life, larger than black, larger than white, simply by committing to use the privileges gained to advocate against wrong and for right. Breaking down barriers by building allies and combating a flawed system with systemic change through awareness and action, replacing emotional reactions. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the power of actively listening to converse, not disperse, rehearse narratives regurgitated, but the glory of empathetically listening to your story, their story, shared stories that collectively come together to turn our story of privilege into purpose.
Thank you for sharing your story with us, Edward. Now, for our next presenter of the evening, Brittany Sherrill. The title of her talk is Visionary Leadership: How to Leverage Disruption to Develop Leaders. Brittany is a power-packed corporate leadership trainer, coach, and author who helps corporate leaders live with more meaning and lead with more confidence. Brittany is known for her high-energy, engaging approach to learning and development. Her practical approaches to achieving results are easy to incorporate without ever getting overwhelmed. Beyond her business, Brittany spends time loving on her close-knit family, 2 fur babies, and trying new coffee
It was August 2019. I found myself enjoying a typical summertime Saturday in the South. I'd spent most of the day running errands, cleaning the house, and then I topped it all off with a trip to grab my favorite coffee. Okay. It was wine. I grabbed some wine. After such an eventful day, once I got home, I decided to also grab a quick nap. But little did I know just how differently things would be the moment I decided to wake up. When I woke up, I found myself in the most excruciating pain I'd ever endured. I could barely open my eyes, and any hint of light felt like a dagger jolting through both of my eyeballs. I was suddenly thrust into having to navigate my world in darkness, and life as I knew it was unexpectedly disrupted. 2 hospitals later, I was finally being treated. I was in a frenzy, and so was the medical team that surrounded me. But once things calmed down and the doctor came to fill me in on my prognosis, imagine my surprise when I heard the words, "This is a pretty bad case, and there is a possibility that the temporary loss of sight in your right eye may not be temporary." I don't know about you, but for me, being in the midst of darkness and disruption is definitely not a comfortable disposition. It's like you're in this space where it's difficult to see what's even right in front of you and nearly impossible to predict what's going to happen next. But despite the presence of chaos, work, life, responsibilities, and demands continue to require you to show up. And let's be honest, the anxiety factor increases a few notches when you have other people looking to you for guidance. That notion applies whether you're the head of a family unit, in command of a Fortune 500 leadership team, or somewhere in between. It all counts. So here I was, a corporate trainer, an executive coach, a wife, my parents' only child, a dog mom, working full-time as an educator in special education. Here I was, serving in roles where other people would be looking to me to lead them through a turbulence I'd never had to weather before myself. I mean, maybe you've never experienced loss of your eyesight, but it's no secret that some essence of the same darkness and disruption I speak of engulfed millions of homes and workplaces alike in the wake of the 2020 global pandemic. Like so many leaders right now, clambering to move themselves and others beyond the darkness and disruption, I found myself the captain of a ship in uncharted waters. I quickly realized that there may have been many variables that I didn't have control over. But in that moment, I made a decision to narrate the heck out of the variables I could control. So here are the 4 pillars of visionary leadership that I had to lean on in a moment of darkness and disruption to develop the leadership of myself and those connected to me. Because the thing is, when you're tapped into your vision, you can see even when your sight is obstructed. One of the first things I asked the doctor when he finally came to discharge me was, when will my sight be good enough to drive again? This was extremely important to me because the hospital was over an hour away from my home. And I learned that I would need to make daily trips to the hospital for treatment and monitoring until further notice. The weight that came with his response was deafening. He said, well, after a couple of days, I suggest you go ahead and start practicing driving with your sight as is, because with the severity of your condition, your sight may not be restored. And if it is, it most likely won't be to the strength it was previously. Something happened though. I remember almost as immediately as he said it, I rebutted, oh no, sir. I'm getting my eyesight back and I'm getting it back to 100%. This is also probably a good time to say, I don't know, maybe a disclaimer. All said remarks are my own and do not constitute medical advice in any way whatsoever. But honestly, when the doctor filled me in on my prognosis, I responded without thought, with an automaticity that even somewhat surprised me. Where was this inner confidence arising from so assuredly and so determined that despite how bleak the statistics, the research, or even the medical experts sitting directly in front of me predicted my outcome would be? How was it that despite it all, I was so confident that I'd achieve the outcome that I desired? Mindset. It was mindset. Everything we do must first flow from the mind. See, over the previous year and a half, I had been focused on my personal development. I was reading self-help books. I had started listening to inspirational podcasts, investing in personal development coaching. Each of these small steps to small decisions to prioritize my personal growth, they were planting these mental seeds that were being tilled for such a time as this. See, I didn't realize it at the time, but I've been actively rewiring the way I saw myself. I was more in tune with my strengths, my true desires, and how to thwart any thought, belief, or information that did not align with who I knew myself to be. Research indicates that your eyes simply take in light, but your mind interprets what to do with it. As a visionary leader, your mindset is the driving force behind what you believe is possible. I even recall a sermon by a millennial pastor, Pastor Michael Todd, where he emphasized that sight is what you see when your eyes are wide open. But vision is what you see when your eyes are closed shut. So I ask, what do you see as truth about you when your eyes are closed? When situations are not ideal and you're thrust into a sea of uncertainty, what do you believe to be true about your team? What do you see as truth about the ability to carry out the vision together? How can you help others connected to you rewire the way they see themselves for the better? Because whatever it is that you believe, you then base everything else around that. In that moment of darkness and disruption, when the doctor gave me that less than ideal prognosis, I believed that my willpower in conjunction with my family and my team's commitment to support me, was more than enough to carry us to breakthrough. And so I believed it with so much surety, and I had been programming myself to believe it for so long, it happened automatically. It rubbed off on my family, my team, and even my doctor. On the ride home, after being discharged from the hospital, I immediately had my husband chauffeur me to grab my favorite coffee, because I mean, coffee always makes things better, right? Oh, and by the way, it really was coffee this time. Living over an hour away also meant that I had plenty of time to tap dance with my thoughts and reflect on what had transpired, as well as explore what I envisioned for my future. See, as a visionary leader, it's important to give yourself space to decide what your desired outcome even is. Sometimes, in a haste to make movement, we painstakingly glide into a direction that we end up despising. Like one scoop too many of ice cream, or 1 hour too long of a meeting, or one proposal too complex. That's why the second pillar is outlook. Even with your eyes closed, what do you see for the future? Upon arriving home, my family, business network, clients, and my job were all bubbling with questions about what was the plan and how could they support it. But the truth is, my family, my business, my clients, my coworkers, they couldn't fully buy into the vision nor fully commit to following through if they were not first clear on what we were actually working toward and what their part was. And that clarity could only come as a result of me having the ability to communicate the vision in a crystal clear way. What does that mean for you? It means take time to explore the possibilities and then decide, even sometimes collectively, which of these possibilities you and your team will pursue, and then effectively communicate the plan with them, even if it's just an overarching sketch. But the truth is, though, you can have the winner's mindset and a presidential outlook. However, you must also assess the vision by measuring its V word. The third pillar is viability. What tools, resources, connections do you and your team need to carry out the vision fruitfully? While we all understood at this point that the plan was Operation Get Brittany's Sight Back, I had to strategically collaborate with the people connected to the vision to co-create the how and the who. Because here's the thing, in order for me to gain access to the proper treatment, I need things like transportation, an hour each way to the hospital daily. I would need to delegate many of the tasks in my business because my usual capability to just hop on a laptop and do whatever I needed to was obstructed. There were household chores that I could no longer uphold my end of the stick on. I mean, much like many households and workplaces right now have been thrust into cracking the code on how to thrive via unusual methods. You know, virtual meetings versus face-to-face, kids playing outside, yet maintaining 6 feet of separation, a basketball stadium with seats holding screens that showcase the faces of virtual attendees. The key to establishing a vision's viability is to laser in on discovering individual strengths and leveraging them to lay the framework for powerful action. This allows team members to operate in their zone of genius and grow their skills without burnout nor unnecessary resistance. Prime example, my mom volunteered to fill in as my driver since her retirement schedule allowed for it. And in the process, she learned that she was a better driver than she thought she was, because this experience pushed her to drive distances she typically never would have. My husband chipped in to help with household errands because he knew that our household necessities were most accessible to him. And in the process, learned how to handle some new things around the house he had probably never even thought twice about before. Listen, my dog even adapted his outside play schedule because I wasn't able to move around outside without tripping over sticks and other things. So ask your team, how can we get this done in a way that's viable? And then after establishing viability, it's time to execute. Your most powerful actions will take place as a result of leveraging the strengths of each person connected to the vision. While I had never expected to lose my sight, it taught me how to lean into what I could see, even with my eyes closed. And it challenged me to discover just how vividly I could convey that vision to others in a way that they wanted to be a part despite the incertitude of the future. I truly believe that the mindset, outlook, and viability pillars of visionary leadership equip stakeholders with a framework to execute the vision with crystal clear clarity and unwavering confidence. In less than 30 days after losing my eyesight, it was restored to 20/20 clarity, actually much better than it even was before the incident. That's the beauty of visionary leadership if you do it right. You can leverage loss to restore and redefine the standard of performance. So when you find yourself in darkness and uncertainty, wondering how to leverage disruption to develop leaders, just remember to move. M, mindset. O, outlook. V, viability. E, execute. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your story with us, Brittany. Now, for our final presenter of the evening, please welcome TedxRush Felder. The title of her talk is What Fog Can Teach Us. Born in Stamford, Connecticut, and raised in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, TedxRush Felder had no plans on becoming a social entrepreneur. Equipped with a master's in international business from NSU under her arm, a love for design, and empowering youth, she made a conscious decision to go beyond the status quo, say yes to her dream, and launch Goose and Gander in 2015. She launched the brand after a long career in finance and getting laid off from jobs as an accountant. Her life's passion is to empower others to tap into their own, do more of what they love, and live their purpose. Along with the brand, she now works for the nonprofit network for teaching entrepreneurship, which puts entrepreneurship classes in schools across the country. With no formal entrepreneurial experience, she has used persistence and commitment to fuel her journey. TedxRush has worked closely with various nonprofits in South Florida and has shared her early entrepreneurial journey to help others through various features. Her motto is, "Life is too short not to go the unpaved route." Fear is the #1 dream killer, and TedxRush believes life is meant to be lived, not drudged through.
As we ring in 2020, excited about the turn of a new decade, we would have never imagined what was ahead of us. A pandemic, continued racial injustice, fires, no toilet paper, economic unrest, hurricanes, and insurrection. Not to mention the things that have happened in our own personal lives. Job instability, a family member or friend getting COVID or passing, being away from your spouse as I was because of COVID, the anxiety of living through such an uncertain time, or becoming overnight teachers while maintaining our own work. At almost 40, I consider myself to be in pretty good health. I work out, eat a balanced diet, and try to get decent sleep. In late September, I noticed my pelvis was bloated and immediately thought, I need to stop eating those extra cookies and do more crunches. As the bloating didn't go away, I went to the doctor. After a few tests and an ultrasound, I found out that I had a 5-pound fibroid in my stomach that was the size of a football and pressing against my right kidney. With surgery being my only option to remove it, I began to plan for it, which the surgery did take place successfully in late December. I was also in the early stages of a potential pending divorce, and my good friend Kwanzaa had just passed away from cancer at age 40. My age. 2020 was really 2020ing. On a Friday afternoon in November, as I vented to my family friend, manicurist, and quasi-therapist, I shared with her my overwhelm, my sense of sadness, my grief. I had so many questions for her. Like, what does it even mean for someone so young and healthy that they can pass that way? What does it mean for my own health? What does it mean for my friend Camille, who now has to raise her daughter, my goddaughter, without him? Over the nail bowl, she looked up at me and said, "Who are we if we've never been through anything? Who are we if we've never been through anything?" You see, historically, we're taught that to succeed, to live a greater, more fulfilled, meaningful life, we should avoid going through rough patches, bad moments, or what I call fogs. We all want to experience that 2020 vision. It exemplifies clarity, calm, peace, and focus. Having 2020 vision means instead of spending our time avoiding our fogs, but to embrace them, stand strong in them, and go right through them. We've had those moments that shake us to our core. The painful catalysts that kind of entice us to transform. The ones that set the tone for our next life chapter. The ones that cause us to pivot. The ones we never forget. You see, in hindsight, I realized I spent a lot of my own time avoiding what I thought was failure. A recent study showed how resistant we are to change and uncertainty, where we tend to look for certainty in almost everything that we do, forgetting that almost everything is uncertain. When we resist negative emotions in response to bad experiences initially, we're more likely to experience similar negative moods or symptoms in the following months, as opposed to people who fully embrace their emotions up front. The study found that habitually accepting negative emotions added up to better overall psychological health over time. You see, our negative coping mechanisms, avoiding our feelings, or trying to numb them can actually interfere with the development of our own self-belief, which is key to our self-esteem. They can reduce reality, kind of oversimplifying itself, excluding real depth or sidestepping the rich complexity of our lives. But when we embrace our difficult situations and learn not to avoid them, it increases our understanding of self-truth, self-awareness, and even our wellness. We know our lives are made up of good and bad experiences as we kind of toggle between them. But how can we capitalize on our fogs as almost gifts instead of letting them take over as only negative experiences? What do we do when we find ourselves feeling stuck, frustrated, can't see clearly, or find our way out? Growing up, I thought I had to follow the status quo. You know, go to college, graduate, find a job making a lot of money, no matter the cost of my true fulfillment. I thought success was based solely on how much money I made. But growing up in a Jamaican household, if you didn't become a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant, you were pretty much a disgrace to the family. So I did what anyone would do in that space. After 10 years in accounting, feeling unfulfilled, and a lot of lessons learned, I went the unpaved route. Day by day, I help students become entrepreneurs. And by night, I became an entrepreneur after getting laid off 2 times in 2 years and Google as my main source. When you start your own business, don't have any employees or any money, your first employee becomes who else? Mom. So a couple of years ago, my mom and I were on a mini road trip to Tampa around 5 a.m. for a pop-up event. The road we took is called Alligator Alley. Now, this road is extremely dark, isolated, and swampy. For about 45 minutes, we drove through this deep fog. Fog so deep we could barely see in front of us. We even thought about turning back. But as my heart raced, fingers gripped the steering wheel, my mom sat next to me nervous. We took our time, drove through the fog, and I was reminded of 4 things that day. I reminded myself of those same 4 things recently over these last few months. Number 1, be flexible on your journey. Fogs allow us to slow down, change lanes, rest, or even pause to gain insight. Our journeys aren't linear, but grief and hope can coexist. Our fogs kind of create movement for us. They challenge us to think of who we are now and take inventory of who we want to become. Number 2, be led by your faith. You won't always see the finish line, but our fogs can teach us to move with caution and be more intentional. You see, embracing our fog is not denial of the past or our current situations, but it's more having hope for the future. I was reminded that faith leaves room for surrender. Number 3, fog is temporary. You'll be uncomfortable, stretched, and sometimes unsure. I got the most amazing advice from friends, like, this too shall pass, it gets better. But while you're in the midst, that's the last thing that you want to hear. But we can choose to almost remain still in our fogs or forge right through them. It's moments like these that have taught me the most. You see, embracing your fogs is not basking in them or diminishing its power, but it's more trusting what currently is and having faith in the future for what's to come. And lastly, number 4, don't go at it alone. Even with one person that helps you navigate through however they can. Those that comforts us, nurtures us, but also holds us accountable. I was reminded of how appreciative I was of those on my journey with me. Even my friend Carlene that brought me prune juice during my hospital stay post-surgery. You see, these aren't tools wrapped neatly in a bow, but they're more like prompts that can help get you through. Who am I after I've been through my fogs? You see, in hindsight, I'm reminded that the breakthroughs we seek are often gifts found in the fog we try to avoid. But it's not solely the fogs that give us room to be greater versions of ourselves, but it's more like the effort to heal and work through them that allows us to come out on the other side, our own effort. We can gain the opportunity for growth, resilience, openness, newness, and even hope. That's how we experience 2020 vision, to dive deeper into our personal and better truths. You see, I realized that we are truly the guardian of our own light. We can't predict when fogs will come or when they'll lift, but we'll know for certain that we can center ourselves right in that haze. We also know for certain that one way or another, we will move forward with clarity once again. I recently saw a tweet that I think sums it up best. Adrian tweeted, "My son's homemade boat sank, and upon launch in the bathtub, she thought he would be sad, but instead he was overjoyed and said, 'My boat turns into a submarine.'" That's the kind of energy we need in our own lives. Embrace your submarines and your fogs. Thank you.
What an amazing way to end the night. Thank you again, Tahaj. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give all of our speakers one final round of applause. Sadly, our time tonight is coming to an end. But before you leave, we would like to thank our TEDx faculty sponsors, Andy Garman, Mitchell Cooper, and Michelle Murphy, for helping put this wonderful virtual event together. Lastly, a special thanks to the co-presidents, Elena Myers and Aman Bardwaj, and the core and subcommittees for their dedication to this year's TEDxRush U event. Thank you.